Hey everyone, I'm Tom and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about all the new to me authors I read here in 2025. And it was a pretty spectacular year on this weird kind of stat that I'm keeping track of here. Of the 50 books that I have finished so far this year, that number will change a little bit as we get further into December. 24 of them have been from a new to me author, which I mean, that's almost half and that's awesome. And I think it just shows that one, I wasn't in the middle of a bunch of series or didn't make progress in a bunch of really long running series that I probably would have liked to, namely Malazan and Wars of Light and Shadow. If I had really focused and read a bunch of those, this number wouldn't be nearly as high. And then also just my other little cheat is that because I don't reread, it's easy to always be picking up something that is new or something from a new author. So I think that gives me a little bit of a leg up on that front. But what I will say is only two of these authors I read more than one book from. So of the 24, only two I read more than one book from, and that would be Christopher Rocchia, which I read a decent amount from, and Rebecca Yarros. I read two of the three books out in the Fourth Wing series so far. So of all of that, a lot of these were just one and done. And with that being said, I did not read a single author this year that I either do not have plans to or would not read another book from. So I think this has just been a really spectacular year in expanding my horizon and trying a bunch of new stuff. I think that's just a really special thing that every single book I tried from a new person, I would be more than happy to read something from. Some of them either don't have some. I know there's some translation stuff where they're only in a different language that I won't ever be able to read, or they only have one book. But, that's a whole different, scenario. I would read stuff from these authors going forward, which, like I said, pretty spectacular and everything. And some other fun stats: of my top 15 books of this year, 10 are coming from new to me authors, and my top 6 books of this year are all going to be coming from new to me authors, which is just like, what more could you ask for when you go out and try stuff? So that's super exciting. And so we're going to go through, I'm going to list off all of the authors that I read this year and also a book from them, and we'll go from there. So first up is Barbara Kingsolver with Demon Copperhead. I read this, in the early beginnings of the year, and man, this is a truly special book. This is one that I pretty much would recommend to anybody that has, actually, this is just a book I would probably recommend to anybody. I think it can just really highlight some of the struggles people face in today's modern age. And I think it's definitely one that is worth reading for most people. Bob Prohel, this is Dragon Date. This is probably not one that I would recommend to a lot of people. I think this is an Audible exclusive. It was fine. It was a good time. I would read something else from them. But this is not one that I would push for you to go and try out. We also have Brian Evenson, and this is After the Animal Flesh Begins, one of the strangest books I have ever read. Once again, not necessarily one that I would tell you to go out and try, but it was good in a weird way, and it's a really weird book. And if you want something weird, go ahead and read this. This is something that is also very, very short. I think it's like 15 pages or something like that. Next up, we have Chance Dillon with Mercy, Tears of the Fallen. This is definitely one I would recommend. This is like the sales pitch for this series, and obviously I'm friends with Chance, so like bias, blah, 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 all that fun stuff, whatever, who cares. It is like a Dark Souls, Malazan kind of mix, and if you like those kinds of things, this is going to be a series for you. Next up is C.F. Eagledon. I'm not 100% sure how to say that last name, but this is the first book from the Empire of Salt trilogy. This is called Darien. This is another, if you really like fantasy books, this is like a good fast-paced fantasy story. This isn't the kind of story that needs 700 pages to tell you a story. This is a 300-page book that does more in those 300 pages than other fantasy series and books do in 1,000, and that those have their place. Like, those longer series have their place, but let's be honest, sometimes you just want to get through the story, right? Like, you just want the story to happen faster. You don't need, everything to boil for 100 years before something actually happens. After that, we have Christopher Rocchio, which, like I said, currently 9. It will actually end up being 10 by the end of this year when I finish Shadows Upon Time. That is the Sun Eater series that I have read from him. He has a few other works out. I haven't read any of those yet, but I will be. And if you haven't read Sun Eater and you're a fan of sci-fi or fantasy, it is definitely a sci-fi series. This is a really special series that I definitely do highly recommend that you read. We also have Clara Keegan. This is like, I think, the first book that I read this year, and that would be Foster by Clara Keegan. This is another one. This is a super short. I think it's like 80 pages, and this is another one that I think just tells a really touching tale about a young girl, and it is another one that I would definitely recommend to pretty much everybody. I don't think this is one that I would hold off, unlike the next book, which is by Dashiell Hammett, and this is The Maltese Falcon. This is a book that was written in like the 1920s. It's like a very early spy kind of thriller cop story. It's obviously a very, very famous movie. That's actually why I read it, because the movie is so famous. I wanted to read the book. And this is not one that I think I would recommend to a whole lot of people. It's a very niche kind of story. It's written in a very interesting way. We never get like any internal monologue or anything. It's all just like, this is what they said. We don't get any of those deeper thoughts or emotion from anything. If you're interested from like a movie perspective, maybe you'd be interested in reading this like I was, but this isn't one that I would really say you need to run out and read. Next up, we have E.M. Foster, and this is The Machine Stops. This is another very short story. It's a fun sci-fi story, and I think it was written in like 1919. So I think this is a good snapshot of like, what people would thought the future could look like. And this is one that if you are interested in that kind of sci-fi, I think you should definitely pick up if you haven't yet. Next up, we have Eric Bauckham, and this is called The Signal. This is another Audible original, like exclusive kind of thing. It's fine. I think the ending of it goes in a way that I personally wasn't super thrilled with, but you might, once again, probably not one that I'd say you really need to go out and read. After that, we have, I'm not, Hiroshi, you know what, I'm not going to embarrass myself with trying to say the last name, but this is Edge of Tomorrow or Kill la Kill, and I think they're the day after tomorrow. What is it? Edge of Tomorrow. There's another name for this as well. This is also a very famous manga, but this is the novel form. It's also the Tom Cruise movie and Emily Blunt, I think, are in it. And that's actually why I read it. And this is, once again, one of those sci-fi ones that I think starts out really, really well, kind of dies down in the second half. But I would not recommend that you actually read the novel. I've heard the manga and the movie are actually a much better way to consume this. So if this is a story that you have heard about or are interested in, I would probably point you to those two mediums. Next up, we have J.A.J. Minton, and this is Discovery. Once again, I'm friends with them, blah, 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 bias, take whatever you want. It doesn't really matter to me if you care that we're friends, but this is another one that I definitely think you should check out. This is a much more H.P. Lovecraft-esque kind of story, cosmic horror, all of that kind of stuff. And this was really my first foray into it. It was definitely a book that was outside of my comfort zone, but one that I really ended up enjoying at the end. There's some really bold characters that just really stick out and still to this day are stuck in my head. So I'm definitely going to recommend that you go out and read Discovery. Next up, we have Jacqueline Harpman, and this is I Who Have Never Known Men. This is a absolutely fantastic book. Not one that I think is going to click with everybody. It's currently not clicking with my fiance, but this is one that I think does probably have broad appeal. I think it's written very beautifully. I think it explores dystopian, society in a way that I haven't seen it done, from a perspective that I don't think I have really seen it done in a way I haven't seen it done. So it felt very new and fresh to me, and it's definitely one that I'm super glad, and I have to thank Joanna at Joanna Reads for getting me to read that one. Next up, we have J.L. Odom. This was one of the self-published fantasy blog-off winners, or the one that won this year, By Blood, by Salt. And this is, once again, if you are a fan of military fantasy, this is one that I would recommend that you go and read. I think the language in it is very beautiful. Once again, maybe I have a little bias here. I was in a conversation with the author about it. I buddy read this with a couple people, and then we had a conversation with the author herself, and that was an awesome conversation. So maybe, once again, I am biased, but again, I don't care. I think you should still go ahead and read that one. After that, we have John Le Carre, I think it's probably French. I probably just massacred that. Sorry to all the French people out there, but this is Call for the Dead. I was hoping this would be kind of a companion to the James Bond books that I read a little while ago, because this is also a spy kind of thriller. And I think there are maybe books later on in this series that people speak very highly of. This is the first in that series, and I don't think it hit the mark I really wanted it to. And this was also just one that felt like it's a acquired taste for sure, and probably not one that I would tell you to go and check out. Next up, we have Marcus Kilwer with We Used to Live Here. This is absolutely a book I want everybody to read because I think the ending is so divisive. I know people like me who absolutely love it, and I know people who it absolutely ruins the entire book for them. And I think a book like that is so brilliant because it sparks conversation, and it's something that you can have a strong opinion on. And so this is another one where I'm like, yes, I absolutely think that you should read it. Next up, we have from a fellow booktuber, Michael Cronk. This is The Immortal Investigation. This is I guess you would consider urban fantasy. This was really my first foray into urban fantasy. I haven't read like a Dresden Files or anything like that. And this was also a debut book. And you can tell that this is maybe somebody's first novel. It maybe doesn't have all the tricks that somebody a little bit more experienced would have, but this is also one that I had a really good time with. He did send me this book, once again, bias, blah, 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 all that fun stuff. But I would recommend it. I think it's a fun time. If you're into the urban fantasy sphere, I think this is a fun one, at least, from somebody who is very inexperienced in that genre. Next up, we have Nathan Bollingard, and we're going to go with that. And this is Crypt of the Moon Spider. This is probably not one that I would recommend to everybody, but this was a good horror read for sure. If you don't like spiders, this is definitely one that you can pick up and say, yeah, this is why I don't like spiders. So that is kind of how I feel about that one. It is also very short. Once again, not 100% sure it's one I would recommend to everybody. And I will say the same thing about the next book by Percival Everett, and that is James. This was like hugely popular, won Barnes and Noble's like award and everything. And I think it's an extremely well done book. Like the craft of writing is on display here, but I don't think it's something that a lot of people are going to, I don't know, it's a funny thing to say. I think a lot of people maybe in the fantasy sphere, which is primarily what I read, I don't think they would maybe enjoy this as much as a lot of the other things they read. It's very different. It's much more literary than a lot of the fantasy stuff. And obviously, there's no fantasy elements in it because it is a take on Huckleberry Finn, and it kind of changes what goes on with that story and kind of looks at it from a different perspective. I think the title of the book, kind of tells you what that is if you have read it. Next up, and this is, like I said, other than Christopher Rocchio, the only author that I read more than one book from, and that is Rebecca Yarros with Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. I think at this point, if you are somebody who would like to read those books or not, and there's probably not anything I can say to you to change your mind one way or the other. I've had a fun experience reading those with my fiance, though, and that's what I will say about those for now. Next up, we have Robert A. Heinlein with Starship Trooper. This is not one I think I would, unless you're a big sci-fi person and you haven't read anything from Heinlein or Heinlein, I don't think this is something I would tell you to read. There's some really interesting, cool sci-fi concepts in here, but there's also some very heavy-handed political beliefs that I think he sprinkles in here, not so slightly. And I'm not saying that makes the story bad. I just makes it harder for me to recommend to people because, not everybody likes that kind of stuff. And as we get here towards the end, Robert L. Forward, and this was Dragon's Egg. And this is a book that I really liked, but definitely not one unless you are into really hard sci-fi. I would not recommend this one to you at all. It is very dry. It reminds me, it's reminiscent of some of the stuff that happens in The Three Body Problem with some of the dry science that I don't think a whole lot of people care about and probably just glaze over anyway. And I think it's much more important to this story than anything in those. And then last up is Susanna Clarke with The Wood at Midwinter. This was originally like a radio play that they then made into like this illustrated kind of novel. This isn't something I would tell you to go spend your money on or anything like that either. So, a couple duds there at the end. But that is all of the new to me authors and the books that I read from them. Let me know if you have read any new authors that turned into being much like all-time favorites for you. I know for me, Rocchio is definitely up there now. He's definitely, an all-time favorite for me from that list. So like I said, definitely let me know any of that down below in the comments, any thoughts, all of that fun stuff there. Or as always, you can hit me up in the Discord that is also linked in the description. But that's all for me. And remember to read what you want when you want.